South Africa is scheduled to host this year's Group of 20 summit this coming weekend, and while President Lee Jae-myung is poised to attend the multilateral meeting, his counterparts from the US and China, to name a few, will be absent. With more on Press Perspective today. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Friday, November 21st, here in Seoul. I'm Min Sunhee. The Group of 20 summit begins tomorrow, that is Saturday, in South Africa, and today we touch upon this multilateral meeting and its agenda this year. For this, I have Kelly Kasulis Cho with the American daily, The Washington Post, live on the line. Kelly, it's been a while. Welcome back.
I'm so happy to be back. Thanks so much.
Right. And here in the studio, we have Ruy Valdes with Spanish news agency EFE Spain. Ruy, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, Sunhee.
Right, Kelly, let's start with you then. Let's begin with some general background information about the G20. When and why was it established, and what have been some of its most notable achievements?
Right, so I'll start from the very beginning. G20 stands for Group of 20. It's the 20 most economically powerful nations in the world. Technically, it's 19 of the most economically powerful nations in the world, plus the European Union that kind of acts as one here. Together, these countries make up about 85% of the global GDP and 75% of international trade. So we're talking about a group that really kind of manages the global economy. And so they meet about once a year. And you know why? I mean, it's really for the sake of stability, for countries to open up dialogue about how to keep both the economy, climate change, things like that in a positive place. And whenever I explain G20, I always tell people, like, imagine a world where the top 20 economies in the world that make up 85% of the global GDP weren't meeting and weren't communicating at all. So it's a pretty high stakes summit, generally speaking. The group itself was established in 1999 in response to the financial crisis of the late 1990s. Many people in South Korea remember how devastating that time was to the global economy and to the economy domestically here. But the first summit, I believe, was in Washington, D.C. in 2008. So this year, it's supposed to be hosted by South Africa. And just so that people know, I mean, the group of 20 countries that we're talking about, they include the US, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, Argentina, Turkey, the UK, France, China, of course. And so it's always seen as a way to touch base on global trade, the economy, but also just some greater diplomacy things. Geopolitically, it's a good place for dialogue when you have countries that, have different political ideologies but have to work together on the basis of trade. It's a really important meeting. I think for everyday people, it can sound a little bit boring, but just imagine the spectacle of the top leaders and officials from the 20 biggest economies in the world meeting together. There's always a little bit of drama and some interesting headlines that come out of it.
Right, indeed. For now, though, Ruy, as we wait for that particular gathering to start tomorrow, what do you suppose makes the G20 even more important, considering the current geopolitical climate?
Yes, well, as Kelly explained, the importance of gathering all these economies from Western, Asian, Global South, it's a once-in-a-year opportunity to debate about different issues. And of course, the current state of affairs in the world, it's a state that challenges multilateralism, especially since the beginning of the administration of Donald Trump in the United States. We're living in a world where the economies that, or his economy that promoted free trade or alliances with different countries is putting all that in questions with tariffs, with disputes against allies, etc., etc. This forum will take a lot of relevance also because we have the reference of what happened in APEC before. And what I mean with this is that we can try to expect, what everybody wants to do is to compare what the joint statement will say in the G20 as comparison to APEC. In APEC, it was quite positive that both the leaders of the United States and China met at the margins of the event. But at the same time, in the joint statement, there was like a watered down, let's say, like a reference to free trade. They never use it, or to the WTO. So we want to know if they will keep that language in this forum, now that you have all these economies from all around the world, not just from a region, and will they be able to coordinate to find common ground, establishing these statements, and of course the main debate or the main interest it's regarding trade, but as Kelly mentioned, there will be also the other diplomatical issues and other things at stake. But yeah, the war right now is a war where multilateralism is being questioned, and the G20 will show again how good or how bad it is today.
Right. The interest in the diction of the potential declaration to be announced at the G20 in South Africa also takes place, Kelly, because US President Donald Trump has announced his intentions to boycott this year's summit in South Africa. Could you give us some context, and what has been the response to Mr. Trump's decision?
Yeah, so before getting into kind of the politics between President Trump and South Africa specifically, I think it's worth noting, and a lot of analysts have pointed this out recently, that President Trump is pretty different from other US presidents in that he's not necessarily unwilling to break protocol or decorum. The United States' attendance at G20 summits is well established and very routine, but he has shown during his presidency that he's not afraid to boycott something or to not show up to an event. While he may like the spectacle of a big meeting with world leaders, he also is willing to, leave other countries in a state of dismay by his lack of attendance. And so that is to say that, there's some meaning for why he may have rejected going to this G20 summit in particular, but it's not necessarily out of the character that he has shown for some other major meetings and world events. Now, this is a little complicated to talk about, but President Trump has essentially claimed that South Africa discriminates against its white citizens and that there is a genocide against white people happening in South Africa. This really isn't founded by any major reputable organization, and the president of South Africa actually essentially refuted this when President Trump said it by saying, I'd like to know where that is because I've never seen something like that, in that kind of roundabout way, saying that he doesn't know what President Trump is talking about in terms of these claims of genocide. President Trump has appeared to use this narrative that he has forwarded to build up some strength with his own political base, particularly Caucasians, white people in the United States. He's also prioritized refugee admissions for white people from South Africa. So this is one of those kind of difficult situations where the president of the United States is forwarding something that's, not really founded and using it as a political basis to not show up to this global event. Now, with that said, I think it's worth noting that Russia and China have both indicated that, they might not be sending their top leaders as well, but only delegates. And so maybe that factors into this a little bit as well.
Kelly, in the meantime, quite a number of pundits, even here in South Korea, are saying that Mr. Trump's absence from the G20 this coming weekend may actually provide others with the opportunity to fill the leadership vacuum. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, when President Trump first mentioned that he's boycotting the G20 summit this time around, there were a lot of analysis pieces that came out essentially saying that this is an opportunity for China to once again step up and take advantage of kind of the uneven footing that other countries are starting to feel with the United States under the Trump administration. So in other words, it's no secret that President Trump's kind of unconventional way of dealing with diplomacy has strained some relationships with U.S. allies. I mean, South Korea is a great example of this, right? While the U.S.-South Korea alliance remains very strong, there have been times where it certainly has felt uncertain during President Trump's presidency, as well as now with his threats to say, make South Korea pay for troops, U.S. troop presence here in the peninsula, or to withdraw troops, referring to South Korea as a rich country that is not paying its fair share in the trade relationship, things like that. So just imagine that kind of dynamic happening with many other U.S. allies. So again and again, when President Trump doesn't show up or has an unconventional approach to these kind of diplomatic events, analysts tend to see this as an opportunity for other major global superpowers to step up and have more influence in that conversation. I mean, literally, if you're not sitting at a table, how can you have any control or influence over the conversation, right? With that said, I mean, the media has been reporting so far that Xi Jinping, the president or the leader of China, will not be attending. Putin will likely not be attending. And so there's a question of what that really means if the top leaders are not there. But South Africa, at least, has kind of tried to recover from this and say that they will continue to push their agenda forward and try to come out of this with some kind of victory, even though the U.S., which is a major player in a lot of the conversations that South Africa wants to discuss, will not be present.
Right. Also on the absentee list, Ruy, is Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, and she's also said that she'll be absent from the G20 summit in South Africa this weekend. What appears to be keeping her at home?
Well, her absence is by design, we could say. She's honoring a promise that she made in August that she was not going to leave the country at least until December this year. This promise has been respected. Also, she didn't attend to APEC here in South Korea, which, of course, she was invited. And for the viewers to understand a little bit about the Mexican current political situation, the predecessor of current President Claudia Sheinbaum, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, he had a line of prioritizing domestic issues than issues abroad. And he publicly stated that he was not going to prioritize leaving the country. He did attend quite a few events in U.S. and some multilateral, but very few compared to other presidents. So it seems also that President Sheinbaum is trying to go in a similar line, probably not as extreme as the predecessor, but a similar line because they share the same party and he is still a very big influence in the country as being such a popular president. So that would be it. In fact, like the reason she's not going is she committed to do it. But there are also other things that we need to take into account as probably incentives that also keep her inside of the country and not giving her the opportunity to change her mind. Right now, there's a lot of turmoil in Mexico because there was one of many, but one quite high-profile murder of Major Carlos Manzo of Uruapan in Michoacán in North Mexico, which has unfolded protests in the city, also in Mexico City, some that ended with violence and police repression. So right now it's a very delicate moment in the country for the president to leave. I don't believe, or pundits don't believe that it will be well seen if she leaves the country in this particular moment. It is also interesting, one development that happened in the beginning of November that is related to South Korea. So for many months, South Korea and Mexico trade relationships were a little bit tense because Mexico announced that they would apply up to 50% tariffs in the main sectors where South Korea invests in Latin American country. And this created a lot of concern. Even we had a chance to ask President Lee Jae-myung during the APEC. We asked him if he managed to talk with Mexican representatives about this issue. He said that other officers, of course, met a Mexico representative, which was the Secretary of Economy, Marcelo Ebrard, but that he did saw a relation between Trump's tariffs with this plan of Mexico of imposing tariffs. As you may know, Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. share a free trade agreement altogether. So there was many analysts that they were saying that Mexico was pushing these tariffs to South Korea. It's in fact tariffs to all the countries that Mexico do not have a free trade agreement with, which include South Korea and China. So pundits and analysts were saying that this was kind of provoked by pressure of the U.S. also, maybe as a negotiation, bargains, or something of that nature, something that Mexico has denied all over since they announced the plan. But President Lee Jae-myung related, we also had the chance to ask to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Cho Hyun, and he also kind of insinuated that from the perspective of South Korea, it has some relation to these policies. But the development that I wanted to talk about is that Mexico paused the application of these announced tariffs. They were going to do it at the beginning of the year, and recently they say, you know what, we're going to pause it until next year. The exact date is not really confirmed. This was some document, I think, that was leaked, but it's pretty, there's already comments from the legislators of the party. And basically, what now we're seeing is that after Trump and Xi Jinping met and the trade tensions reduced a little bit, and also the South Korea and U.S. managed to get finally to sign agreements in trade and security. Now this happens. Mexico announces that it will pause the tariffs. So maybe there could be some relation, of course not confirmed by Mexico, but there are many signals that they could be related.
Right, and of course this is something you'll be keeping an eye on for us.
Yes, of course.
Right. Kelly, in the meantime, do tell us a bit about the agenda of this year's G20 summit. And again, does Mr. Trump's absence from the summit this year raise prospects of a joint declaration, do you think, which is something that Ruy touched upon earlier?
Yeah, South Africa has indicated that the biggest items on its agenda include climate change, sustainable development goals, gender issues, but really working to make natural disasters that are worsened by climate change affect, the poorer parts of continental Africa and the global South less. And South Africa has indicated that they're still going to try to push forward these goals and a joint declaration with or without President Trump's attendance. Just to read a direct quote from their International Relations and Cooperation Minister, he said, "We're forging ahead to persuade countries that are present that we must adopt this declaration." And then he says, the institution, meaning G20, cannot be bogged down by someone who is absent. So clearly that's in reference to President Trump, right? So I think, those that are attending do want to push forward. I will say it's tough when you're having a conversation about climate change, how climate change is worsening natural disasters and the damage related to those, and pollution and things that are driving global warming. Those are all things that the United States really needs to be a part of. The U.S. and China are among some of the greatest contributors to global warming and pollution in the world. And so to not have potentially the U.S.'s cooperation on this, or at least, to be there as a kind of a part of the conversation leading up to a declaration, it does maybe undercut those conversations, but there are a lot of other forward-thinking nations that are participating in this. So if there is a joint declaration that comes out of this, it's not to say that it won't have results or that these other countries don't have power to make a difference on these agenda items. I think it remains to be seen going into this, looking at media reports and kind of what analysts have said. I do think there's a bit of a sense being communicated that this G20 summit is maybe undermined a little bit by the lack of attendance of several top leaders of various nations, even if they do send lower delegates.
Right. In the meantime, Ruy, what can you tell us about South Korea's own diplomatic agenda at the G20 this weekend?
Right. President Lee Jae-myung is going with the mission to strengthen Korea's role as a middle power bridge in what many consider is a fractured G20 for many of the reasons that also Kelly exposed. Lee will try to outline the Seoul's economic and climate policies under the G20 theme that is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. He as he has been mentioning before in other encounters, he's expected to push for multilateral trade system and amid the rising tariffs and global fragmentation that we have discussed. Also, he will promote an Africa-focused diplomacy, taking the advantage of being at this forum. And in fact, one of the parts also that many consider if U.S. ends up boycotting or sending a lower officer is that it will be a chance, as Kelly mentioned, for other countries to take this opportunity to gain protagonism that probably could have been blurred by the attendance of Trump, which can happen, or usually happens. And so maybe Lee Jae-myung will have this opportunity to focus diplomacy on Africa, expand cooperation, discuss things like development finance, infrastructure, and digital partnership, which South Korea has promoted before in the region. He also has the plan to sustain summits or build bilateral encounters, at least with President of France and the Chancellor of Germany. With France, it's all in this context of the 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties. And they're expecting to discuss security, climate policy, and France's upcoming G7 presidency. Whereas with Germany, major trading partner in Europe, he is expected to discuss supply chains, industrial cooperation, and adapting to shifts in the global trade order. There's also one thing related to the Mexico issue that we talked. Lee is expected to meet with the leaders or representatives of the association MIKTA. We call it MIKTA in Spanish right now. I don't know if that's the way they call it in English. But anyways, this is an association formed by Mexico, Indonesia, Korea, Turkey, and Australia. And of course, from Mexico and South Korea perspective, many people are putting an eye on if they're going to discuss about this issue about the tariffs that they paused, because at the end, this has not been decided. This has just been postponed, and probably there will be, hopefully, some announcement or some new developments on how to improve this. South Korea has been in negotiations with Mexican officials since this thing was announced. So yeah, that will be more or less President Lee Jae-myung's agenda.
Right, and that is something we will be covering next Monday after the G20 summit in South Africa this coming weekend. Ruy, as always, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you very much.
Kelly, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, that ends this week's editions of Press Perspective. Have a great weekend and see you same time next Monday.